on the road again
On
to
the road.
Baking Brits
Yes, we are in Lompoc.
in Lompoc, California, behind the scenes, and we are coming to see Sonia, the fabulous winemaker at
Casa du Metz.
Casa du Metz Winery. And I know it doesn't look like there's anything going on here, but today was the first day of harvest apparently, and somewhere in a cold room are
Grapes.
lots of fabulous grapes. We're waiting for Sonia and we'll get to find out some more soon. All right, we're looking for Sonia.
I wonder where she is.
Oh, I don't know. Aha!
Hello,
Sonia!
Hi.
Hey.
How are you?
So happy to see you guys.
This
Thank
is
you for
so-
being here.
Well, thanks for inviting us. This is so great. We get to see behind the scenes.
Behind the scenes. We're
Which is
still
quite
not
incredible.
quite behind the scenes in the action, but we're working on it. It's
Okay,
been, as
we-
we said, it's been a very, very late harvest.
We are sort of intrigued by,
Concrete eggs.
yes, your concrete eggs.
They're quite lovely, right?
Yeah, they are.
Can you tell us about them?
Yes, I can.
They, I know.
They seem very soothing.
They're very
They
tactile.
are very soothing.
They're very tactile.
They are very tactile, and that's sort of the point. So it's a vessel shaped as an egg, as you can see on a platform that we built. It's about 4 inches thick of
Oh, wow.
concrete. So it's gravel and sand and sort of made into this concrete vessel. And the shape of the vessel helps with the idea of fermentation. So if you're fermenting whites in here or rosé or whatever you decide, there's kind of a rolling system that goes in, and the bottom you have a lot more lees contact here. So
Uh-huh.
when the wine settles, the lees can kind of be around here, and so kind of have this shape. The other thing about the concrete is that there's sort of an ingress and egress of oxygen. So if stainless steel, for instance, like these tanks, if you have wine in there and it's closed, there's
Oh,
no
God, they're huge.
inside or outside access for air. So
Right.
wine ages differently, and it'll change. It's just like the exposure to air is almost zero, right?
Got it.
And in a wooden barrel, let's just say if the exposure is 10, right? So it's not leaking, and I'm using an arbitrary number, right? It's not leaking, but there is sort of a selective oxidation that we call. So you have, as the wine ages, water evaporates, wine concentrates, the alcohol concentrates, and then you have these sort of polymers that bind that create this sort of textural component in the aging of the wine. So if stainless is 0, let's say, and a barrel is 10, concrete is about a 3-ish, right? So you have an exchange. The other thing, but not as much as a barrel and a little more than stainless. The other thing that's very important, really the main value in a concrete vessel, and it comes in all kinds of shapes, depending on what your goal is, sizes, like you can custom anything you want. This was just our choice. That it's the idea of a textural component, and so the texture also doesn't exist in a vacuum. So you only have so much to work with. Fruit, all the things that make up the flavor of a wine. And so if one thing is fleshed out a little more, the other thing shifts. And that was very unique for me to discover. Last year was the first time I used the concrete with Roussanne and Grenache Blanc. So it was fascinating. And so it is kind of the idea of not what are you creating or what do you expect to create. It's really what is being created. And that's the most beautiful part of it. Wine is living. It's the most beautiful thing. You take this grape from vineyards that you work with, nurtured, looked at, tasted, talked about, touched, all of these things, and then you translate it in your processing, and then so I never have an idea of I'm expecting this to happen, because, I mean, I don't magic wand, like, doesn't work that way. For some people it might, but not for me. And
Well,
so
it's
then
quite
the
I
idea-
mean, obviously, winemaking is this whole journey, this whole process.
Well, it's, you get, like we're talking about this vintage, you get one opportunity every year to hopefully get it as right as possible. I don't think about it in terms of perfection, because what is perfection,
Well,
and
you-
like if we talk about it in baking, they say even if your pie crust didn't turn out, it's going to taste better than right? Something that you bought in a plastic wrap at the
Totally.
grocery
Oh
store,
yes, yes, yes,
right?
completely. Well,
So
these are all
it's
natural.
kind of this idea of just kind of doing what you can in the most perfect way possible to sort of achieve something that hopefully is sexy and slightly imperfect and delicious, right? That's kind of the goal.
Fantastic. So, good morning, Sonia. How
We
are you?
we drove straight in there.
Yes, yes.
We need a little background.
So we are the two bacon Brits, Pascal and Sandra, and we are interviewing Sonia Magdeski
Perfect.
of Casa Dumet's winery in the Santa Ynez Valley in California.
Well, actually, we're in this
We're right now in Lompoc, just
Sorry.
outside of Santa Rita Hills, but yeah, overall.
Santa Rita
we're-
Hills, which
we're
is
in
now
Santa
its own appellation. Is that correct?
Yes, there's 7 appellations in Santa Barbara. So there's Santa Rita, there's Santa Ynez, there's Los Olivos, there's Alisos, there's Happy Canyon, Los Olivos District, and I am probably Ballard Canyon.
Ballard Canyon.
I go to a lot of them and
Oh,
I'm
yes,
missing
yeah.
one. I was
Okay.
like, hey, come on, brain, work.
Okay, so can you give us a little background on how you got started in the wine business and when you opened Casa Dumet's winery?
Yes, my very first harvest was 2004, and it was very garagiste. So I
Okay.
helped plant a tiny half-acre vineyard in Malibu.
In Malibu?
In Malibu.
Wow.
It was a total failure. And I say that in the most respectful, loving, beautiful way. It was an incredible experience, and place matters. So vineyards, unlike radishes or carrots, radishes didn't go, pull them out, didn't work, plant them somewhere else. 30 days later, you're eating radishes. For vines, there's a ton of effort and work that goes into creating a grapevine and creating a vineyard, right? And so the work you have to put in, you don't start seeing any result till 3 or 4 years later. In the meantime, you think, oh, everything's going great, you know? And when you don't know what you don't know, you think, well, how hard can it be? It's very impossible to get it right. No, it really is. And so, you know, it's beautifully challenging. And so that vineyard, while we worked very hard at it, it was a half an acre. I was digging the holes. We were planting the vines, and it wasn't the right place. So it no longer exists.
Okay.
And so it wasn't warm enough when it needed to be warm enough. It wasn't cold enough when it needed to be cold enough. We didn't have enough sunshine when it needed enough sunshine. It was too cloudy, too foggy. So we were constantly battling mildew pressure, botrytis.
Oh,
these
yes,
things,
all-
right? So you're working all this effort, and you're not really getting any return for your effort. And so the whole point of any kind of agriculture, and grapevines in particular, is how do you work gently on the land, and with the least amount possible of effort, right? You have to have effort, but the more you're in the vineyard, the more you're walking the vineyard, the more you're touching, the more you're doing all these things, meaning that something needs a little more work than your return. And so the goal is to find the spot and the location with the variety that really kind of achieves your goals without exerting too much cost and effort, because then in the end, yes, it's romance, but there's an economical result to this as well.
So after Malibu, you came.
So right away at Malibu, we had this little fun little wine group, and we were sourcing grapes from Santa Ynez, and we would truck it down and smash them in the garage. There was about 8 of us, and so it was very fun. It was very garagiste. I had nothing to do with wine. I born and raised in Michigan, first generation Macedonian. Went to Michigan for undergrad for political science. Went to grad school for Michigan State, journalism. Had a Fulbright scholarship. I thought, I am going to go work at the UN and solve world peace. Then I helped plant this vineyard.
From world peace to vines.
Well, and
One glass at a time.
I started to say, and it's true, right? Now when you see the result is, I say world peace 1 bottle at a time.
Yep.
Because now we've created something. We've taken all of these scenarios, all of these components, and we've put it in a bottle or jug or whatever you want to do, and then we get to sit around and share, and we talk, and we drop our shoulders and we relax. So I know everyone's talking about, the polyphenols and this and antioxidants and the grapes and all that stuff is totally fine. For me, the health benefit of wine, obviously in moderation, is that
All
you're-
things in moderation.
Yeah, but like your blood pressure drops. You're totally, for the most part, like you're relaxed and you're hanging out. And
Yeah.
when you're having a meal, when you're cooking, when I'm cooking by myself, I'm eating a hunk of bread and some cheese and a tomato, and then I'm done, like as fast as possible. But when I'm cooking for someone, it's like, oh, the joy of that.
Yes.
And so wine is the same. Like you don't make, well, I don't make wine just for me to sit at home at the table. It's for the sharing and for the community of it all. So the community is the number one aspect of everything that we do. Without the community, without you, without this, without people coming in and tasting, without people trying and exploring, then there is nothing.
So when did Casa du Metz started? When did you get to the?
So it was just for fun in '04, and then '08 was my first sort of true commercial vintage. Worked with John Belfi at Tierra Alta Vineyards. God rest him, he just passed away. He was the greatest human ever. It was like, we shook hands in the vineyard. He said, no problem, this is your row. I'll send you a contract. Never sent me a contract. We've worked together since then in '08 without any contract.
Wow.
And I pay my bills and he sends the grapes.
Yeah.
So,
Fantastic.
so I mean, that's sort of the spirit of this area, you know, and so that's sort of how it started. And then I started making wine, and then more and more. And again, at some point I was writing, waiting tables, doing all kinds of stuff, and making wine. And then it just kind of becomes very addictive. And you think, oh, well, here's harvest again. You know, even though the year seems long, it happens very quickly. So suddenly you're like, oh, we're in it again. Oh, we're in it again. Oh, we're in it again. And so if you don't do it, it's like, wait, what am I doing? You still make it. And
So that was 2008.
So 4 was when we planted, started making wine in the garage. 2008 was the first sort of real commercial, like bottle, sell it in the market. That was Viognier, and those vines don't exist anymore, unfortunately. But then soon thereafter, and then '09, and then 10, and then 11. So now every year I'm like making more wine, and again, more, from 100 to 200 cases to. But if you're not selling it, it builds up.
Yes.
Right? And I wasn't like, hey, come buy wine. I was just like, oh, here you go. And I was doing all these other things to kind of fund this small program. And at some point, I had to decide, well, what are you doing? You know, why are you doing this? What's the point? And, you know, now I realize, and then I had to realize, like, you're either in the wine business or you're not in the wine business, right?
Yeah.
If you're in the wine hobby, that's great, that's super fun, that's awesome. But then there's no sort of economic structure there. You're just having fun and giving wine away and enjoying it. If it's a business, now you have to sort of make a decision and make a commitment. And
So when did you open the tasting room?
2011.
2011. The one in Los Alamos.
Yeah.
The one that we like so much.
Yes,
Yes.
hopefully. So yeah, that was it. So I had to decide, and I committed, and I stopped everything else. I stopped waiting tables. I said, okay, I took out a tiny loan from my parents, set up the tasting room. I already had product. But you know, I look back now, like I knew nothing. I didn't know how many pours do you pour at a tasting? What kind of glassware do you use? At that time, too, was a very interesting intersection. It was right when Square started coming out, so the iPads and Square, or it was like running your credit card through this, you know, the thing and the carbon copies and all that stuff, and the processing.
Yeah.
Right, so I was like, well, that seems a little antiquated. This is too new. I don't really understand, but that's new. I was like, okay, I'm going to do Square. And there was no internet in Los Alamos, so I had to get like a little stupid. I mean, I knew nothing except people, right? So we had
It's the key connection everywhere.
That's the key connection.
Yes.
I mean, if this is hospitality.
Yeah.
Yes, it's wine, but it's hospitality.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
if you don't like people, don't get in this industry.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Because it has nothing to do with you sitting in the corner, right?
No,
it has to
absolutely.
do about sharing this
Yeah.
and expressing your philosophy and your love and your journey to hopefully, and the product matching it, that you can sort of connect. And so that was sort of it. I started in 2011, and I was my only employee, and I thought, well, I can pay my rent. My rent was cheap, which is why I chose Los Alamos, and it's darling.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I was like, oh, I did the math. I thought I only need to sell, I don't remember what it was, like 25 bottles of wine a month to make my rent. my goal was to make my rent. I was like, okay, if I can make my rent for 6 months,
That's-
I'm like living large. And then 6 months later, I was making rent, and I just kept sort of doing it, and I just kept investing whatever I had back into the business. And then I moved the businesses, and I opened the beer room, and then it just kind of evolved.
But you have more than one. So you have Casa du Metz, but you also have the Feminists.
Yes, so I have 3 labels. So
Okay.
Casa du Metz is where it started, and that
Mhm.
was kind of the name of the original vineyard that no longer exists. And then 2014, that didn't exist anymore. So I had to decide, well, if the place doesn't exist, but the reason for why I'm here exists, then who am I, right? So I decided to kind of shift and create 3 brands. So
Mhm.
Casa du Metz now is 1 Pinot every year, and we just add a little tiny Chardonnay, but it's small, it's like 100 cases. So 1 Pinot from the Santa Rita Hills to explore the Santa Rita Hills, different clone, different vineyard. And the idea is that was sort of the foundation of how I started. Clementine Carter is a character from my favorite Western, called My Darling Clementine, and she was a woman on a journey, so I was like, well, that makes sense. And so then that's where all the Rhone varieties come through, so
Mhm.
Grenache Blanc, Roussanne, all the different Grenache, Mourvedre. And then the Feminist Party is the only blend that we do, and that also came about at the same time. So I never wanted to make a blend. I really appreciate sort of the very singular nature of one pick, one place, one vintage. Again, that's for perfect imperfection. And, you know, you gotta get out of your way sometime. Everyone kept saying, like, why don't you make a blend? You have all the pieces. And I was like, I don't want to make a blend. And then they said, try it. And so I tried it, and I thought, oh, you are all right. Like, this is right. And so that was it. And so I thought, well, what's the goal? What's the reason behind it? And I thought, well,
So when did the-
proprietor, Feminist
Yeah.
Party, let's do it. So 2015, Feminist Party came up.
2015.
Yep.
Okay.
Radical inclusion.
Yes.
The vineyards we work with is in that.
I love that. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So we're filming this. It's the middle of September,
Yeah.
and
September 19th,
September 19th.
September 19th.
First day of harvest, you said, yes?
first day of harvest.
So this is unusual.
It's very unusual. It's a
We lucked out.
Yeah.
Well, we lucked out, but for you, it's really challenging.
Yeah, it's pretty it's
So because
pretty-
normally at this time of year, this would be a
normally this time of, so all of these fermentation bins, like this is what we ferment red wine in. right?
Okay.
So these are thin, you know, you can move them. I'm just not moving because they're tight. They're thin, and they're all stainless steel, so
Okay.
they're extraordinarily sanitary. You can clean them perfectly.
Mhm.
They're thin, so the doesn't hold too much temperature, so it cools the fermentation. The volume that's in here is also not that much, so we can manage the temperature in here as well. And so we get in here, and we're either going to boot stomp or do a manual sort of punch down, depending on how we process. And so, in general, in a normal year, at September 19th, half of this room would be filled with grapes with these.
Wow.
And now these are all clean and empty, waiting for us to fill them.
So have you? So you mentioned that you did start picking today.
We did start a teeny bit here, and so our process is fruit comes in, we process, and it rests in the cold room.
Okay.
Again, depending on the pace. In general, it's
How
about-
cold is the cold room?
It's cold. It's like 35 degrees.
Oh, yeah,
It's
cold.
pretty cold. Yeah.
Okay.
It's noisy.
Cold and noisy. Ooh.
So this is Pinot. So you can see how tiny these little baby clusters are, right?
Oh yeah.
Pinot is notorious for being thin-skinned, tiny clusters, low vigor, and tiny berries. So Grenache is probably a cluster of Grenache would be like all of this together.
Okay.
And now we have like one baby Pinot.
Wow.
So we do a lot of what we call whole cluster fermentation.
Uh huh.
So this is where we would go in, and then we would boot stomp. And then over here, this we did 1/3. So you can see there is some juice.
Oh yes.
So
Okay.
we usually do a little bit of like whole cluster juice and then a little bit of whole cluster on top. Again, it's just to kind of mitigate some greenness if it's there and give you options. But
And-
most of the time, we do all whole cluster.
And how long does it stay?
It
in here?
stays here for about 3 days.
Okay.
So it's Tuesday today. We will probably pull this out Thursday or Friday morning. And that's the first time that we check our chemistry.
Oh, okay.
We'll do because after a little while, it'll kind of the skins in general tends to sort of release a little more sugar, so you get a little more accurate reading. So even though we're in the vineyard all the time and you're sampling grapes and you're kind of doing all this stuff, the only accurate reading you really have is when it's all together in one bin, right?
Okay.
Because this cluster and that cluster and that cluster and that cluster individually in a tall bag, you're talking about acres of grapes.
Right.
Until you really know is when you've actually picked it. So
it stays in there for 3 days.
yes, and then we bring it out, and then it gently will warm up. So we keep it there. One, to kind of get a more accurate reading. One is it's called a cold soak is an aqueous extraction.
Mhm.
So water. So think of water versus alcohol. Water is gentler. So I always sort of say, when you have a cucumber in water with lunch versus a cucumber and vodka and a martini, right? The extraction is a little different. So
Yes.
you get a little more fruit. So we start with sort of, because the juice is mostly water and sugar. So you get this aqueous extraction. So you get the softening of the skins. You kind of get things ready, and then we kind of bring it out. Let it gently warm up to kind of our temperature,
Mhm.
and then fermentation will start. And depending on what we're doing, we're either going to inoculate or not inoculate with yeast, depending on the program. And then we just kind of know what our starting point is. And at that point, we stay in fermentation bins for a relatively long time, comparatively. Again, in wine, there's no right or wrong answer. It's just what your preference is.
Right.
And so for us, we will come in, and again, if it's whole cluster, we have boots that never touch the ground, that only go on the grapes, and we'll sort of go from bin to bin, and we'll gently, once a day, just gently kind of get the top wet, as we say, so there's not like mold or anything building, and then fermentation will start. And then we'll just kind of do the rounds for about 30 days.
Oh, wow,
So it stays
okay.
there for a long time.
Yeah.
So then you go from aqueous to fermentation, and then at the end of fermentation now you have alcohol. And so you have a different extraction, It's kind of like harvest. Once you pick the grapes, you can't staple them back on.
No.
And once you press the wine off of the skins, you can't put it back in, right? And so we have found that 30 plus days, we get as much extraction as we need. Our fermentations are also very cold, right? And so you can also monitor, if you want a really hot extractive fermentation, you're going to kick that temperature up. We want aromatics, we want gentle tannins, and so everything we do is long and cold and very gentle. For aromatic lift, for textural components, to sort of pair with that whole cluster fermentation, get a lot of carbonic lift in that too. So that's sort of the process here.
So so normally this is a hiving mass of
Massive
everything.
activity, and it's like you can smell it, you can feel it, the temperature's different, like there's pulsing energy.
Yes.
And now we're like, waiting.
Waiting. Well, the weather this year has been so bizarre.
It never got warm until July 1st was the first warm day. And I know that so well because at the tasting room, we're outside all the time. So I can tell you 2021 in June, what it was like, 2020 in August, what it was like, last year, this year in January. We were wearing jackets until end of June.
Oh yes,
That
it was
never
cold.
happened.
No, it never
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah.
And then 4th of July weekend, it was like, everyone's like, oh my God, it's so hot. And I was telling everybody, I hear you say it's hot one more time, you have to leave the tasting room. We finally are getting heat. Like, don't,
Yes.
We need to see it, yes,
Don't
absolutely.
complain about it, please.
So, what was the appeal for you why wine? What did you?
I had no plan. I helped plant the vineyard, and that was it. And then again, I didn't know this was even a thing. I drank wine, but I knew zippo about wine. I'd be the person that would walk into the grocery store or the wine store. I'd have like $20, and I would spend hours asking the person questions. What should I get for 20? What's my best bet here? Looking back, the person, thankfully was kind. I was probably like, you are wasting my time. But I didn't know regions, grapes. Like I didn't understand any of that. I just knew that it was wine, white or red. And so once you kind of get into the details, I love agriculture. If wine just showed up in a bin and here's the juice, I would not be interested. That's
Right.
not the point. The point is agriculture. The point is the grapes. The point is nurturing and finding and discovering and collaborating, and then creating something. You have this very beautiful, I would say raw material, but you have this fruit. You can eat it as is, or you can transform it into something else.
Right.
And then the options for transforming and what you do, and what you want to express, and what feeds you. I mean, those are the things that I think are the most exciting thing about wine. And so I had no intention of even standing here talking to you about wine, and then little things, and then you know. So then, after I decided, like, okay, this is very interesting to me, I started taking all the classes at Allen Hancock Community College.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I already had an undergrad and graduate degree. I was like, I'm not going to, what am I going to Davis? Like, what if this is not what I want to do? I have a tendency to want to overlearn before I do something, which oftentimes will prevent you from doing something because you know too much. Like, I always say now, if I knew now if I knew then what I know now, I don't know if I would actually, like, if I fundamentally knew what it means to do what we do, I don't know if I would have said yes. But because it's really hard.
Oh, I think, yeah.
It's
I
really
would
hard.
agree with my business too.
Yes.
But
And would you
when
agree too?
Don't know.
I would agree.
You're
Yeah.
just like, oh, there's just one obstacle. I just got to do that.
Yes.
And then, oh, there's one more, and then
But yeah, you
I'll
just keep
do
you
this.
just,
You just keep
moving
going.
forward. Yeah, just
It's not
one.
like everything at once. It's like, oh, this is something
Yeah.
new I have to tackle right now.
So
and
then,
that's it.
so what does a typical day, obviously seasonal, and you've
Yeah.
just said how normally this is a teeming hub of activity, but what does a typical day in the winery look like?
Well, no, not much. But again, if this was sort of very active, and our business is extraordinarily seasonal.
Right.
So hopefully, if you come back end of October, it will be as we described, just like full of.
We'll have to
this
do a
floor
second
would
road
be-
trip.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
This floor would be full. All the tanks would be full. There would be motion, activity, processing. It would just be all the time. Because again, we're not doing this in February or January. Like, this is the season for us to do this.
So in the vineyard right now, what's
In
happening?
the vineyard, well, everything. Yeah. Well, we should go take a look.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, we
let's
can
go.
do that. We'll go and
Yeah.
do that. All right.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
I'll show you all
Let's
about
get
it.
on the road then.
Okay.
We'll go and
On
have a
the
look.
road.